CMorales, Bio 225, June 4, 2018, carbohydrate fermentation testing. I've already labeled all my 4 phenol red tubes. I've labeled 2 of them, the S. cerevisiae glucose and the S. epidermis glucose. The next 2, S. cerevisiae fructose and then S. epidermis fructose. And then the next 2 are the S. cerevisiae mannitol and then S. epidermis mannitol. I have my 6 durum tubes in my alcohol along with my pipettes for so that they can be sterilized. I have my lighted candle. So now I'm going to go ahead and remove my S. cerevisiae number 1 vial and pass it over my lip to sterilize it. So that would be this test tube. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and place it over my fire, sterilizing the lid. Okay, now that I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and carefully transfer half of the glucose powder into the vial. So half of it will go into this tube and then the other half will go into the other test tube containing the S. epidermis. Okay, now I'm going to carefully transfer half of this. Okay, now that I've done that, I'm going to sterilize the lid once more. And I'm going to place the lid on top of it, and I'm going to shake it until the glucose dissolves. Okay, now I'm going to place this one back. Now I'm going to repeat that step for my S. epidermis glucose tube. Again, sterilizing the lid. Okay, now again I'm going to add the remaining half of my glucose powder into this test tube. Okay, and then again I'm going to sterilize the lid before I put the cap back on. Okay, now I'm going to put the cap back on, and I'm going to shake it so that the glucose powder dissolves. Now I'm going to repeat this step for the next 2 test tubes. And I'm going to do this for the S. epidermis fructose. Again, sterilizing the lid. Now I'm going to pour half of my fructose powder into this broth carefully. Now before I close the lid, I'm going to go ahead and sterilize it. Then I'm going to go ahead and close my lid and shake it so that the powder dissolves. Okay. Now I'm going to do the same step, but for the S. cerevisiae vial. Once again, shaking it. Sterilizing the lid. And now I'm going to put the remaining fructose powder into this test tube. And then again, sterilizing the lid before I put the cap back on, just making sure all the bacteria that possibly has been on the lid now from being exposed to the air is all gone. And placing the cap back on. Okay, now I'm going to do the last two. Now this is, I'm going to be using the mannitol powder in the S. epidermis broth vial. Again, I'm sterilizing the lid of this test tube. Then I'm going to pour half of the powder into this test tube, and then the remaining half in the next. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and sterilize the lid. I'm going to place the cap on and shake it until the powder is all dissolved. Okay, now I'm going to do the same steps for the test tube broth for this S. cerevisiae. Sterilizing the lip once more. And then I'm going to add the remaining powder. Okay. And then again, I'm going to go ahead and sterilize the lid before I put the cap back on. Okay. Now that I've finished this, I'm going to go ahead and take out my derms tubes from my alcohol. And making sure that they're completely dry. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and open the S. epidermis test tube that contains glucose, and I'm going to insert one of these into the test tubes. I'm going to now insert my derm tubes facing downward so that the opening is towards the bottom of the test tube. And once more, I'm going to go ahead and sterilize the lid just to make sure, and then go ahead and close it. I'm going to repeat this step for all 6 of my test tubes. Now I have the S. cerevisiae glucose. I'm going to get my test tube, my derm tube, and place it downward into my broth vial. Sterilize my lid really quickly. And close it. Now I have my ester vici containing the fructose powder. I'm going to place one of these Durham tubes in there. These are supposed to, the reason why these are being placed into the test tubes are so that it can gather any gas particles. Now, S epidermis that contains fructose, place the Durham tube in there. And close the lid. Now the test tube with S epidermis containing mannitol. And closing the lid. Now the last one, the ester vici containing the mannitol. And going ahead and closing my lid. Okay, now I'm going to remove one of my pipettes from my alcohol. I'm going to make sure it's dry. And now I'm going to remove the lid of my active ester vici culture. And I'm going to just add 4 drops of this into my phenol red tubes labeled ester vici. But before that, of course, I'm going to go ahead and sterilize the lid. So right now I'm going to add my 4 drops. Into the glucose. Four drops into the fructose. Four drops into the mannitol. And then I'm going to place this drop into into my 10% bleach solution. Now I'm going to grab another test pipette. And while that is drying, I'm going to go ahead and sterilize the lid of my ester vici broth tube. And now I'm going to go ahead and grab 4 drops of my S epidermis broth tube. And with this one, I'm going to repeat the same steps. I'm going to grab 4 drops and place 4 drops into each test tube, the red broth test tubes. Starting with S epidermis that contains glucose. I'm going to do S epidermis fructose. 4 drops. And then lastly, the S. epidermis mandible, and then 4 drops. And I'm going to just flame the lip of my S. epidermis nutrient broth that has been in. And then go ahead and close it. Okay, now I'm going to place my 6 inoculated phenol red broth tubes in my incubation environment for 12 hours. And then after 12 hours, I will take them out and look at them and observe them for any change of color or anything that has happened in my experiment. I'm now going to observe each of my phenol red broths after being in incubation for 12 hours for color change. The S. epidermis mandible had turned like a reddish orange texture color, and this is a fermenter with gas production because there is gas in the derm tube. The S. cerevisiae mandible remained its red texture, however it is a little bit lighter than how it started. And this is non-fermenter because there is no gas in the derm tube. The S. epidermis fructose turned a yellow color, and this is fermenter because of the change in color. However, there is no gas production. The S. cerevisiae with fructose also turned into a yellow color. However, this one has slightly darker yellow tones, and you can tell this is fermenter with the gas production because there are bubbles in the derm tube. The S. epidermis glucose turned more of a bright yellow, and this is fermenter but has no gas production in the derm tube. The S. cerevisiae glucose also turned a bright yellow color, and this one is fermenter with gas production because there are bubbles in the derm tubes. And that concludes my carbohydrate fermentation.